call to the honourable member for Grey.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I must say I feel a bit coming forth in the line after some very fine valedictories. I feel a bit like I'm the last speaker in the session after lunch and I'm stopping people from going to drinks. 17 years. You wouldn't believe it could go so quickly, quite frankly. It's more than a blink. It's more like a hard day's work out in the paddock, quite frankly, and it's tough enough while you're there, but it's over quite quickly. It doesn't seem like it was 17 years ago since I got here, but I must admit I went to a meeting this morning and got out at the wrong floor. I think I started off 17 years ago like that. There you go. But I am reminded in that sense the way that life rolls on of a good friend of mine, Josie. She said one day, you know, life's like a toilet roll. The closer you get to the end, the faster it goes. I love this job. I'm not tired of it, and I'm fit enough to keep going. And I have it seems like I've got a growing task sheet. There's as many things on my desk at the moment as there's ever been. And I think arguably I'm the best informed person in Australia on the seat of Grey. So why not keep going? Well, the answer is, quite frankly, as I told my party room back in March, is that increasingly our friends are falling into three groups. Those that are either touring Australia or the world or towing a caravan around Australia, or those that are trying to die, or those that have been successful in the attempt. And Teresa and I have collectively decided that we're going to spend a bit of time in the former group before we get to the latter, and smell the roses along the way somewhat, even though I must admit that Teresa's probably faced with some trepidation of the idea of having me home full-time. But we'll get along with that. And this job's never complete. In rural and regional Australia, we still have an education gap. We struggle to attract teachers, health workers, aged care workers, professionals. We have childcare deserts. In fact, I think Grey's listed as having one of the worst childcare deserts in Australia, and that is holding back communities in my electorate, because you try and get somebody to come and recruit them to come and work in your business in one of the small towns, and the first thing they say, oh, where do I put my kids into childcare? Well, the government spent a lot of extra money on childcare recently, but we're not getting any new places in regional Australia, and so we need that to change. And I think for those of us that do live, work, born, raised in regional Australia, we're a bit bewildered by the fact that so few people want to come and share this lifestyle. I'm a member for Parks, so there'll be a number of things I'll cut across the themes of what you've had to say, but it's pretty good out there. And so for anyone that's got skills, might be interested in coming, living, working in the seat of Grey, I just say go for it. You won't regret it. So I think part of that is that Australia doesn't connect as well with its traditional roots, its rural roots, its regional roots, and a lot of that is because when we were younger, almost everyone in the city knew someone who lived in the country. Their uncle or auntie lived on the farm, grandma and grandpa, they'd go up on the school holidays, but increasingly that's become a rarity more than the norm, and so there are whole swaths of the population now that are basically intimidated by the thought of going into the country for anything more than a short visit. So it's been a privilege to be a member of the federal parliament. I don't think any of us should ever forget what a privilege it is to be, or who's put us here. And I note in that sense, the Liberal Party's gone through the process of pre-selecting someone to run in my place in the next election. I'm very hopeful that he'll be successful, and to Tom Benning up there. It's his first visit to the parliament, so welcome, Tom. I hope when you come back, you won't be sitting here, you'll be over there. A very enjoyable experience. 17 years, and there's been some very significant achievements in my electorate in that time, and one would hope so for that kind of time frame there would be. But on some I've been the prime mover, on others I've lent my support to the ideas, the dreams, to assist the passions of others. It's how we get things done. We work together in our communities for the common good. And I think members of parliament have a unique megaphone. Many times we can actually use that public megaphone to get somebody in the public service to do what they should have been doing in the first place, or to to draw attention to an opportunity or a miscarriage of justice. But I think that megaphone is best used if it's not overused, that you actually pick your targets where you can make a difference and throw your shoulder to the wheel on those. But as equally, there is so much to do because we need more of those skilled professionals that I touched on before. And we have plenty of critics in the work we do in this place. Someone should come out for a bit of a stroll sometime. Not as many as would drive you out of it, but there are plenty of people that have a fairly low opinion of politics generally. And I just say to them, OK, I can see that not everything we do in this place is perfect, but where do you think they do it better? Just start pointing to those dots on the map around the world where they have a better democracy, where they have better outcomes. And generally speaking, I find them speechless. I do offer in there to say if you can find the place, I'll see if I can set up a permanent visa for you. But there is no doubt in my mind that if you're born in Australia, you have won the lottery of life. We are so lucky. We're the envy of the world. In many cases, I mean, in most surveys, we're in the top half-dozen economies of the world, the highest incomes. We have the fourth longest uninterrupted democracy in the world. That's a pretty amazing thing for a nation that is, like our constitution is 120 years old, 123, I think. It just shows you how unstable the world can be, that we are the fourth longest. We have world-class services, generally speaking. I mean, they're all under pressure, and we all know that we could all do better in certain areas, but don't undersell what we have here. By comparison with many other nations, this is a very enviable place to live. But on that theme, and once again the member for Parkes touched on it, Donald Horne, often misquoted author, who wrote the book The Lucky Country. But what he was saying was that Australia was lucky, but we were in danger of squandering our luck and that our luck would run out. And I actually think I'm more worried about that today than I would have been in 1963 when he wrote the book, because we seem to be loading the dice against Australia and Australia's industries at the moment and disadvantaging ourselves in comparison with other nations around the world. I've just come back from leading a delegation to Morocco, joined by some very good parliamentarians, including the member for Adelaide over there. Thanks, Steve. And look, the dynamism of the place, their ability to get something done in a short time frame, just leaves you wondering whether they're 50 years behind or 50 years in front of us, quite frankly. And they've set up a free trade agreement with Europe, and Renault have built this enormous car plant here, and they're shipping the cars straight back in. They have economic tax-free zones, all these things that are an innovative country on the move, and I think maybe we need to reflect on how they get to that place. Our falling per capita productivity is a great concern. Drifting education standards. We know that our schools are not keeping up with our neighbours in our neighbourhood. Stifling regulations, ever-expanding responsibilities of employers to pick up the bill of national objectives. And on this, just as an example, it's not a bad policy. It's like the domestic violence leave. It's a perfectly admirable thing to do. It's the right thing to do. But how on earth did it end up being the employer's responsibility rather than general society, rather than the taxpayers? That's the kind of thing that we pop on employers all the time. When a government in South Australia just suddenly decides to declare Easter Sunday a holiday, and the pay goes from a time and a half to 2.5 times for people trying to run a cafe. It wasn't theirs to give away. They are giving away the money of private individuals and businesses, and I think we need to always be mindful of that in a place like this here when we make decisions about what those impacts are on the ground. So, as Australians, we're always seeking increasing standards. So the nursing home, the level of health care, the style of holiday have the number of appliances that our parents accepted aren't good enough for us. It all costs money. and yet we expect this great country to foot the bill. And so as we look as those aged care facilities that are now too small for us and don't have the connected bathroom and all those kinds of things, that all costs money. And I think there's a fair kind of argument that we are actually not contributing enough to our nation to make it successful to pay for all the things that we are demanding as a population. So I think that's something we can all reflect on, how we do a better job for our nation. There was a very famous president of the US who talked about what it was we could do for our nation rather than the other way around. I think we are reaching that point. So while people will make claims now to work a 4-day week, for instance, or they don't want to come into work at all, thank you very much, or they want to have more holidays, I think we need to reflect on that level of productivity and what on earth it is that's going to pay for these extra things that we want in our lives. Because there's a money go-round effect here. There are more and more Australians involved in the service industries, and good on them. I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do. But on the other hand, service industries do not create new wealth for this nation. Primary producers do. And in the very broad term of when I went to school, primary producers were people that actually farmed or produced something from scratch, like a miner or a manufacturer. And increasingly there's less in that cohort and more in the area of service delivery. Now, that's all very well as long as the country can pay for it, but it is becoming increasingly difficult to do so, and I think we need to reflect on that. Gray has achieved much, I think, over the last 6 parliaments, and the member for Parkes talked about big shiny things, and I'm very pleased to report that we have a twin bridge in Port Augusta called the Joy-Baluke AM Bridge, the second one. I had to walk 3 transport ministers over that bridge, another one down here, I think, to actually nail that one. And it is the right kind of investment because the north of South Australia, the regions, that's where the mineral wealth is. And in fact, every major mine in South Australia is in the electorate of Grey, which covers just the mere 92.4% of the state. But the Port Wakefield overpass, the dual lanes that we've commenced on the Augusta Highway, which is only going to go now as far as Lochiel and not keep going all the way to Port Augusta, which I had hoped. And that's reprioritisation of the current government, but we should keep going on those things. The upgrades of the Horrocks Highway, Ayr, Augusta, a whole lot of them have had major upgrades, and the sealing of the Strzelecki track. Now, I don't know how many have been up the Strez, but I do know, once again, the member for Gippsland's been up the Strez with me. In fact, we had a photo in front of the sign that spelt Strzelecki wrong. That's been fixed up, I could tell you. But that road, it'll become one of the great tourist routes of Australia that connects Queensland through the outback, brings you down into South Australia, into the Flinders Ranges if you turn left, or you can go right and go up to Lake Eyre. It's not a bad little option, really. And, of course, the mighty Mooma Basin sits right in the middle of it. So that was a good outcome. And then the tens of millions of dollars that have gone into BBRF program, sports and community facilities, town sewage systems, marine facilities, historical precinct preservation, bike trails, tourism, sort of goes on and on. They're all good projects. The mobile phone black spot program. An enormous expansion in coverage. Is it complete? No, it'll never be complete. And perhaps that was touched on again with Starlink. You can't get behind every rock with a radio frequency, but it certainly made a big difference. Another thing I've been involved with, Defence has a penchant for going out and compulsorily acquiring properties, and we've had a fair bit of it go in the electorate of Grey. And I've been sticking up for the landholders' rights, which I think are treated terribly in this situation. I've got people I helped out that had 25 years reaching settlement. I've got others now that we're approaching the 15-year mark on the compulsory acquisition around Coltana. I'm pleased to be involved. Good people. I'm a bit concerned now that it's all done that the Army's going to abandon Koltata anyhow, but yeah, it's been a difficult time for those things. The establishment of 4 headspace units across Grey, that's a great thing. I wanted another one in Port Pirie, and I haven't been able to get it, but only just a couple of weeks ago we opened a Medicare mental health facility there, and I'm indebted to the former Minister Greg Hunt, who actually put those on the line and will fill that space. But those 4 headspace units, we've got one in Port Lincoln, one in Whyalla, one in Port Augusta and another one in Port Augusta. I don't know what that's telling us, but no, in fact there's one there with the Royal Flying Doctor Service. So doing good things, reaching out to our young people. And the dog fence. Where are you, David Littleproud? Here he is over here. Now, the dog fence, a 120-year-old fence that snakes across outback South Australia and protecting sheep farmers from wild dogs and dingoes, you know. And anyway, we were struggling to get this one up at South Australian level, and David Littleproud, we managed to get him to come to open the Jamestown show, and his staff said, we've got a couple of hours free in the morning, got anything you could do? And I said, yeah, I've got a really good idea. So I got a hold of the people up the dog fence, and they came in for a meeting, and we're about 10 minutes into the meeting, and to his great credit, David said, yep, I got it. I got it. I understand what you're saying here. We're going to make this happen. And we did. So with a $5 million contribution from the federal government, $5 million from the state government and $5 million from growers, what I got out of it was an increase in my levy. But the fence is now, I think, about 2/3 complete and making a real difference across the outback. They are really good wins. The regional airports, there's hardly, well, I don't think there is a remote airport, an airstrip in a remote community now that's not sealed for the Royal Flying Doctor to get in, and that's been another remote area airport subsidy. Here in the House, we all belong to all kinds of committees and different organisations and whatever, and there's a couple I'm going to mention here. Unfortunately, the member for Moreton's not here today, but the Enemies of Diabetes. It's an organisation we had to rename, or I had to rename. I don't really want to be a friend of diabetes, so I renamed it the Enemies. But Graham Perrett's been the co-chair with me for the last 9 years, these 3 parliaments. We're both leaving, and I wish him well in his retirement from federal parliament as well. We are very alike, Graham and I think, in personality, like the 2 moons of Mars, as it were. But when it comes to other things celestial, when it comes to opinions on things political, we're more like Venus and Mars, I think. So a fair way between us. Another one, a committee that I worked on, I was chair of the Agricultural Committee, and I went to Ian McFarlane at the time, and I can do a reasonable job of imitating Ian, but I won't do it here in the chamber. But I said, I want an inquiry of country of origin food labelling. And he said, why would you worry? It's been done to death. He said, there's been about 8 inquiries before. I said, yeah, I know that. He said, well, you're not going to get anywhere. And I said, look, all of those inquiries, I've looked at the reports, they all say government should do something about it. We should have a country of origin food labelling system. I said, you give me a go at this and we'll tell you how to do it. How about that? So Commission went ahead, had to get permission from Barnaby Joyce as well. And then we delivered the report. Some circumstances happened and we managed to get it implemented. So when you go down into the supermarket now and you pick up the food and you see the bar graph on it and it tells you how much of that content is Australian, that came from my committee. I wrote the report basically, but with the support of the rest of the committee. It's just what you can do when you actually dig in there and find the answer. And at the time of the inquiry I said there are a whole lot of people in Australia who need to push that shopping trolley down the supermarket and fill it up with the cheapest food they can to feed their family, and they shouldn't feel bad about that, and I say good on them. But there are a whole lot of people in Australia, just like me, who have a high enough income to make a choice whether I want to support Australian manufacturing or whether I want to support Australian growers, but I can't do it if I haven't got the information, and now I have. And I'm pleased that will now spread on to fish, but that was at the time I knew that was a bridge too far. We get too complicated and bogged down. So we made the move, and that was a good outcome. There's an old adage that holds true: you cannot please all the people all the time. We know that's true. But I say to electors, they should elect an individual to this place who they trust to make an intelligent decision on their behalf when that individual is in possession of the facts. You may not always agree with what the elected person, the conclusion they come to, but you should elect someone you trust to make an intelligent decision. It's better summed up, I think, by Edmund Burke, the Irish philosopher, politician of the late 1700s. He said, "Your representative owes you," excuse the sexist language, it was Osby's time, "your representative owes you not his industry only, but his judgment, and he betrays instead of serving you if he sacrifices it to your opinion." My reading of that is we should not be in this place to slavishly follow the latest poll. We shouldn't be driven by those ways of making decisions. We should be here to provide our judgment and lead our communities through challenging decisions. And two obvious areas where I claim to have done so, that have delivered success, and I must say, sadly, only to be reversed by the current government at the change of government, was firstly Sejourner and the cashless debit card. Now, out there we'd had, I think, 7 deaths. We'd had a coroner's report into people sleeping rough, drug, alcohol abuse, really a very tragic story, and one thing led to another. We'd had a number of interim outcomes, and then Twiggy Forrest suggested to a joint party room one day that we pursue a cashless debit card. And with great support of the local community in Sejourner, we led the nation. I thank Mayor Alan Suter from the time, but also the Far West Aboriginal Leaders Group, which was established at the time. It took some real guts and determination for them to withstand some local pressure, as you should imagine, to back the card in. Once again, I think Mr Chester was with me when we were at a meeting, and this old pastor, I thought the meeting was going a bit rough. We had a few public servants in there, and then he stood up and we all listened to what he had to say, and he cleared his throat and he said, "I reckon we ought to do it. I think it'll be a good thing." And we knew we were over the line, and it was a good thing. It made such a difference. Now, there are people that sit around and they've taken surveys or whatever, and it's unconclusive. I can tell you it's as clear as light and day. And in fact, 2 of the mayors that led the community through that time, one has sold his house and is leaving community. The other one is leaving it in the next 12 months because they can't bear to see what's happened to their town since the cessation of the card. So I'm so pleased that our leader, Peter Dutton, has said that we will be bringing back the cashless debit card. It does not take income away from people. It just says you can't spend it on drugs, alcohol and gambling. 3 things. That's all it prohibits. Everything else you can buy. And it made a difference on domestic, public violence, admittance to emergency care. The rates at the moment are far, far higher than they were when the card was in action. School attendance has fallen. The other place where I would claim to have done some, have led the community, was my hometown of Kimber, where the possibility, where we raised the possibility, I raised the possibility, and led the push to establish a national radioactive waste management facility. I'd had the opportunity, courtesy of the round-the-world trip that we once used to have available to parliamentary members that have served more than one term. You could go around the world once pursuing your study topic. And we'd had a big desalination plant planned for the Upper Spencer Gulf, and I was very interested on the environmental impacts of what that might look like. And of course, I've still got one of the world's biggest uranium mines. It's a byproduct of being a copper mine, but in the electorate at Olympic Dam or Roxby Downs. And so I had the possibility of going into Europe, and the French, the Swedes and the Finns showed us a wonderful time and took us through their facilities, and we looked at the uranium fuel cycle from top to bottom, including disposal. And when the opportunity came up for a low-level waste repository, I really thought this was money for jam. It just needed somebody to recognise what it was. But how could I ask somebody else to nominate their property when I was sitting on my own piece of land and could nominate our own. And that's exactly what I did. In the end, I was rubbed out by protocol, to be fair to say, but by then others in the community had offered their properties. Some of them are in this chamber today. I'll come to them in a little while. We, in Kimber, we went through a survey and then 2 full plebiscites. In every one, support for the facility grew, to the point where it reached to about 62.2%, which, for the record, was about the same as the same-sex marriage, which was an overwhelming landslide result, if I remember rightly, so it's worth putting that in context. And then we managed to get it through both houses of Parliament, and there had been claims from an Indigenous group, the Bungala Determination Aboriginal Corporation, had twice had their case thrown out of the federal court. They went back for a third attempt, and on a story that both has a basis that stretches believability, and I've spoken about it in this chamber before, and it was halted by the federal court. But the federal court left the door wide open for appeal, but in the shadows of the approaching voice referendum, the current government abandoned the ship. And there's still no solution. There's still no solution for Australia's storage of low-level waste. Something like 1 in 3 families benefit from nuclear medicine, it's a weak decision by the government. I'm sorry to do that in this kind of address, but really I'm very sad about it. And I'm very grateful to those families that stuck their hand up in the local community. It's instructive to round out, to go on with this theme. It's instructive that the voice referendum was rejected in a landslide, 60-40. It was actually close to 80-20 in my electorate, and rightly Australia rejected the notion of 2 classes of citizens. And I think we've taken a backward step as a result of the voice referendum, and part of the reason it was rejected, I think, is because native title has become an extortion racket. Projects have been halted or delayed at the penultimate moment by a claim of significant religious or cultural interpretation. Now, rampant conservationists are edging in and misusing native title groups. I have absolutely no doubt of this. It's an unholy alliance. They are eroding. By doing so, they are eroding Indigenous people's standing in the general community. The intolerance to this in the general community is rising. It all started with High Marsh Island, a case back in the 1990s where there was fabricated evidence. More latterly, we're seeing in the refusal on the Balali gold mine, the Santos Barossa project pipeline, and again in grey with a small desalination project at Port Lincoln, which has some community resistance, but the government, South Australian government, not worried about that community resistance at all. They're all quite prepared to go ahead with it. But then, of course, when the Indigenous owners, well, they're not owners really, because this is on freehold property. Once again, it was the Bungala have put in an objection. It all seems to fall over. When the community objected, that was okay. When Bungala objected, it's become a stopper. Now, Australians don't see this as fair and reasonable treatment, and that's why I actually decry the fact. It's causing more problems than it's fixing. I've allocated a large amount of time in my 17 years in politics to trying to better understand the issues and opportunities of Indigenous Australia, and particularly remote communities. 8% of my electorate identify as Indigenous, and around about 40% of those live in remote communities. Now, in the ones that are living in the bigger communities, things aren't perfect, but we are absolutely making progress. And once again, the member for Parkes touched on it. I'm seeing success stories, people in jobs, getting their kids to school, driving good cars, living in good houses, living a good life, enjoying the Australian dream. But I can tell you in remote communities, we're not there, and we're not there by a long way, and I fear that we are actually going backwards. I think I've gained a lot of respect in those remote communities, simply because I go there regularly, and I'm prepared to sit down with not only the leaders, anyone I find outside the shop in the village square, sit down in the dust and talk about what it is they want, what they'd like to see changed, what drives the place. And I think I get respect for going there, and I absolutely claim that I have their best interests in heart, and I've delivered investment on many levels and friendships. But I'd have to say that despite the billions of dollars we're spending in these remote communities, the improvements in schools, health clinics, shops, roads, dialysis units, communications, it's all very evident. But despite all that investment, the improvements to the actual outcomes are hard to identify. The gap is not closing. The education system is failing. The reason it fails is because kids aren't at school. No teacher can teach children who don't attend school. And here's the sad news for them as they grow up. If you can't read a label or the safety directions in this modern world, there isn't a job for you. It's just virtually impossible. So we've got to break this cycle. Remote communities are totally dependent on government dollars, taxpayer dollars, for their existence. And we should be able to have a grown-up conversation, not just here, but with them everywhere, about the wisdom of a policy that maintains and grows a population in a part of Australia where there is not a genuine economic possibility of underwriting that existence. Men particularly have been totally stripped of their role in society. The men's roles were to deliver shelter, food, find water, defend their family. Now all that comes from the government. They go down the shop. One of the biggest sales on the APY lands, for instance, is frozen kangaroo tails. It tells you about that disconnect from traditional lifestyle. Now, I gave a speech on this recently in the Federation Chamber, and the member for Clark was in the chair. I'm sure he won't mind me sort of quoting him. I don't want to get it wrong. But he came up to me afterwards. He said, he said, I'd never heard anyone explain it to me like that before. And clearly, you're not speaking from ignorance. You are speaking from experience. Now, I don't know if that will change his attitudes on anything, but he was generous enough to grant me that concession that it was heartfelt and it came from experience. Enough on that. We'll get up to the thank yous, and serving in this place is a privilege, and that the electorate puts its trust in individuals like me and like all these people sitting around, my friends sitting around me at the moment, is a wonderful. It's an honour within itself, and it's a wonderful thing. I've had wonderful opportunities to travel at least some of the world. I just spoke about Morocco before, to meet national and local leaders, and to meet the best and brightest people with plans and ideas to improve the nation. That's a privilege. I've laid wreaths on delegation at Hellfire Pass, Brunei Bay in Brunei. I've been to Menin Gate twice for the evening service, which has been carrying on since about 1926, I think. I've walked Kokoda in a private capacity and attended an Anzac Dawn service at Gallipoli. And on that occasion, I'd only attached myself to the delegation at the 11th hour, it might be, and it was a freezing cold day, and we were sitting at Lone Pine. And on behalf of the Australian government, Mr Snowden will lay a wreath. And then on behalf of the Senate, someone else will lay a wreath. And on behalf of this, someone will lay a wreath. On behalf of the House of Representatives, I thought, when are they going to get to do that? Mr Ramsey, oh, right, so I'm rugged up, I've got my gloves on, I've got the scarf on, I've got the coat on, off it's all coming as fast as I could go. I got there in my suit, so it didn't look too bad, went up and laid the wreath. That's a kind of special moment. But it even got better, because my sister, who's in the gallery at the moment, she said, you wouldn't believe what I saw when I turned on the news after Anzac Day. First thing that came on the ABC was there's my brother going down to put a wreath up at Lone Pine. So there you go. So all the best laid plans for everyone else that wanted to get on the ABC that night. It was down to the member for Grey. So, but they are wonderful experiences. But I think perhaps the greatest reward for this job is actually when you fix up personal problems. When you wouldn't, from the outside, I don't think you rate it, but when people come to you and the system has chewed them up and spat them out and not taken any notice of what they've had to say, or it's just, everyone's seen Little Britain, computer says no. You can do anything you like up until when the computer says no. And then me and my staff put our shoulder to the wheel and achieve an outcome that should have happened in the very first place. But you just know that you've made just such a complete difference to their life. So it is a privilege, and I think what getting ready for a political life doesn't prepare you for is that you become a councillor, and people will come and tell you the best and the worst of their lives. And I think both of them are a privilege. I think that people share some of the darkest moments with you and don't necessarily want you to fix it, but just to listen, that you can be that person, I think is a very rare and pretty privileged position. So, come to thanking some of the people who give me the opportunity. But before I get there, once again the member for Parkes touched on the mudslide, and we were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. The 6 new Liberals and 1 National Party that arrived here in 2007. Of that group, the 6 Liberals, 4 have already left. Actually, I must have that a little bit wrong because my maths don't quite add up, and 3 are delivering directly valedictories today, and there's still going to be 1 left, so something doesn't work quite right there. But anyway, we walked into that party room on the first morning, and of course there was a lot of licking of wounds going on after the years of the Howard government. We'd lost government. Now there was 6 new Liberals there that thought it was a wonderful thing. They were just elected us, but everyone else was a bit down. And the redoubtable Bill Heffernan, Senator Heffernan, said, "The reason we lost this election was all the deadhead candidates we had." Well, we all looked at each other and said, "He must be talking about us." So we became the deadheads. And so for some years we used to meet as the deadheads and get people with political experience to come in and speak to us. And I think in fine form we decided to appoint Bill Heffernan as the patron saint of the deadheads, and we used to have an award called the Billy for the person that had asked or caused the most problems to the government that week or the week that we met in. So it was a good time, and as I said, including Scott Morrison, after this next election we'll be down to just Alex Hawke, who I can't see here just around me at the moment, but so he will have to carry on. Without us. So just on the 3 valedictories today, and I think it is the 3 from this side of the chamber, I must say, very fitting that we give them together. We came in together. We're going out together. Of Nola, man, from day one, a pocket rocket, and I know you won't mind me saying this, or a pint-side milking maid, but don't get on the wrong side of Nola. Determined for her electorate every time, and I'm a great admirer and a great friend, and we will remain friends. And to Mark Colton, we have so much in common, Mark. We're both live members of APEX. We're both farmers. As farmers, we both understood that if you wanted to drought-proof your farm, you had to marry school teachers. who are sitting together behind me at the moment, Robin and Teresa, and together they piloted the Parliamentary Partners Association for 6 years. And I think that is a very important organisation. If we could get more of the partners to come more often to Canberra and share in their partners' experience, we might be able to keep them together on a bit more regular basis rather than having so many of them split up. So I think anything that brings you closer together through those times is a very good and important thing, and I thank them both for that. To the electors of Grey, 6 times they've seen fit to appoint me to represent them. Thank you so much. I don't say that lightly. To the more than 400 members of the Grey Liberal Party who actually journeyed up to a 1,000-kilometre round trip back in 2006 to pre-select me, thank you so much, and they've just gone through that process again. I never would have had the opportunity. If I'd never been the Liberal candidate for Grey, I would have never had the opportunity to be the member for Grey. of the 800 people who make up the membership of the 22 Liberal Party branches across Grey, thank you for your work each and every election, keeping the flame alive in the community, because we all believe in the same things. Even though we have our differences across the chamber, we all believe in a better Australia. A lot of us just believe in a different pathway to get there, and I'm absolutely thankful for their support. To my hometown of Kimber and my lifelong friends who have supported me, some of them that are here today, some of the most important, not all of them, certainly through that period of the radioactive waste management facility, but I'm just the third member for Grey from the Liberal Party. So the seat of Grey was formed in 1903, and I'm only the third Liberal. We held it, in fact, from 1943 to 93, we held it just once. There's 50 years. We held it in one term in the 1966 Parliament, when it was won by a fellow called Don Jessup, who later had a career in the Senate. In 1993, Barry Wakeland for the Liberal Party won the seat, and I succeeded him. Now we've held this seat for the last 31 years. Barry is from exactly the same hometown as myself, Kimber. I think that's quite a remarkable outcome, really. So for 31 years, my small community on the northern edge of the wheat belt has provided the member for Grey. It's a community of just over 1,000 people. I think we punch above our weight right around South Australia, particularly. The current chair of the South Australian Local Government Association is the Kimber Mayor, Dean Johnson. And with Caroline Schaefer and her father, Arthur White, Kimber has contributed a Member of Parliament at either state or federal level for 40 of the last 48 years, and for 17 of those years we had one at state level and one at federal level. I think that's quite remarkable. I think something about living on the edge. It's not easy making a living in Kimber, and I think it's always attuned the people of the town to what the exterior threats are and why we need to have a common purpose when we come together as a community and work for those outcomes. So one of the great joys of the job is the plethora of new friends we've made right around the electorate. People that we would have never ever met in another life. But oh yeah, I blew that a bit. But anyway, obviously there's too many to mention, but a special call out today for Anthea Kennett, up there in the pink. Thank you, Anthea, who's come from Wallaroo here today, and her and her father, her husband John, committed no greater sin than being our friends when we took our kids to boarding school together. I managed to recruit them into the Liberal Party and rebuild the local branch there. They weren't on their own, I must say, but thank you for making the effort of being here today, Anthea. The team from Kimber, Joe and John Schaefer, Jeff and Jenny Baldock, Graham and Heather Baldock. Heather was my first campaign manager, and they're still here with me 17 years later, back in their local boy. I thank them so much. They are just such wonderful, valuable friends. There's another couple who couldn't be here, Bert and Barb Wilford. Barb is a ball of energy and with a shoulder to the wheel on any attempt. And of course, one of the things you need to do is try and get some people up on the APY lands when you're having an election. And so Barb was often at the forefront of leading a delegation or being part of a delegation to go and hand out for Rowan Ramsey. And one particular afternoon, Teresa, my wife, and her, I think they were at Mimiley, and there was a fair kind of raucous going on about 50 metres away from the voting station, as sometimes happens in these communities. And just when they thought things might get really out of hand, this big bloke walked in in traditional dress with a spear, and he went over in no uncertain terms, told them they should disperse and get about their lives, which is pretty much what they did. And then he headed towards the voting box with his big spear. And Barb and Teresa went, oh, gee, what do we do when he gets over here? And Teresa said, hold your nerve. And he came up and he put his spear down on the ground. And then, as he should, he took a how to vote for Rowan Ramsey card and went in and executed his democratic right. So to Barb, that's been a very special contribution. One year, the Electoral Commission, someone got sick and they only did half the booth, so she headed back up and did the second week. I always say, to get to the lands, incidentally, it's 1,000 kilometres without going out of my electorate, from my gate to the turn-off. And then if you want to go to the WA border, it's another 8 hours. So I try and do that a couple of times a year. Anyway, To my staff, to Jen Wells, Fiona Duffield, Neil Sawley, Courtney Stevens, Katie Patterson, Meredith Westbrook, all here today. Thank you. To Deb Darby, who came down ill and couldn't make it. They've all been outstanding. Leonie Lloyd-Smith, the reason I just put her on the end, Leonie Lloyd-Smith, most of you in this place will know. She comes to Canberra with me virtually every week for the last 10 years or so, and she's the chief organiser of the staff nosh up on Wednesday night, so they may well miss Leonie's services. And also Vicky Manners is back in the Port Pirie office today, tying the fort down. Look, they are a terrific staff. Terrific because not only do they serve me loyally, as they should do, but they serve the electorate loyally. And when people come in with their problems, they have the time, the patience and the compassion to sit down and talk through those problems. And so I am well served, the electorate is well served by them, and I thank each and all of them. Some of them, in fact, 3 have been with me for the entire 17 years, and 1 just a few months short of that, Jen Wells. In the chamber today we have Teresa's sister Jackie and her husband Peter, as are my sisters Beth and Janet and her husband Andrew. My other sister Anne-Marie is watching from home, so thank you all for being here and your support throughout my time in this parliament. 3 wonderful children, all here today. Alex with her husband Ben and our grandson Arthur. Can you give me a wave, Arthur? There you go. Good on you, fella. To Courtney and Lachlan, wonderful supporters. Thank you. I know you've given up a bit for me to have this career. I hope it's been rewarded in other ways, but certainly one thing we haven't done is lose touch. At the time we made the decision for me to have a go at this job, Lachlan was actually at university in Adelaide and living in our unit. So while they always needed us, they didn't need me to drop them off the footy anymore at Netwell. So it was a good time for us and for me. Which brings me to obviously the last and most important, which is my beautiful wife Teresa, my soulmate of 46 years plus. And in Mark's terms, he's treaded the platform before me, but many people consider her to be the second member for Grey. We get 2 for the price of 1. She's driven some of the countless kilometres that we've travelled around the electorate, dealt with behind the scenes things like donations. We look forward to those, Tom. There'll be a lot of those requests coming in for those. Particularly in the early years, was setting out her artwork. She's an art teacher by trade, and setting out the material that comes out of the office. But really, we've been each other's sounding board. Not always in furious agreement. Sometimes just furious. But I think it proves the strength of our relationship that we can have a very vigorous discussion about things and then just move on. Because there's no doubt we still love each other, and I love Teresa, and I'm so privileged to have had her in my life. And many people have said to me over the years, well, you know, you've got a driver, haven't you? Because we do about 80,000 a year. And I said, yeah. I had to marry her. But it's been a wonderful journey. We made the decision to embark upon it together. We're ending it, I guess, in a privileged way, that we've got to choose the time of our leaving. And I'm working on, like I said, being a long time in that first group before I get to either of the second 2 and going off and enjoying it. Thank you all for your friendship and support.